Hi there, my name's Simon Currigan, and welcome to this week's episode of School Behaviour Secrets. Today, we're going to be looking at what we can do in schools practically to support pupils who are at the risk of criminal exploitation. And don't forget, if you find School Behaviour Secrets helpful, please make sure you like and subscribe us and share our podcast with other teachers and school leaders so this information can reach more people. It's the quickest and cheapest way of supporting the show because all it will cost you is 30 seconds of your time. We've also got a free download that complements this episode really well. It's aimed specifically at school leaders and it's called the Exclusions Checklist. Its purpose is to help you ensure every avenue of support has been explored before resorting to permanent exclusion or for supporting pupils who are on that path. It's written to help leaders make good decisions under pressure and use best practice to respond effectively to incidents of challenging behavior. You can get it for free. I'll put a direct link in the episode description if you're listening to the podcast or in the comments if you're watching the video version of the show. To explore the topic of today's show, I'm very excited to welcome our two guests today. Steve Warner and Desmond Skyers. Desmond Skyers is the mental lead at St Giles. He's a published author and a motivational speaker who leads a team of facilitators as part of the SOS Plus service, which we're going to explore today. SOS is a preventative and early intervention service that puts lived experience at the heart of combating child criminal exploitation, gang involvement, and serious youth violence. He's been instrumental in the development of this highly impactful mentoring program, which provides one-to-one support to children and young people vulnerable to criminal exploitation. Desmond is passionate about this work due to his own lived experiences and his constant desire to want to give back. Steve is currently the head of education at St Giles and St Giles Trust SOS Plus. His previous experiences include roles such as deputy head teacher at Luton and Hertfordshire, where he's demonstrated strategic leadership and has led on behaviour management, staff recruitment, quality assurance, and school improvement. Steve has a proven track record of implementing strategies to raise standards and improve student outcomes. Desmond and Steve, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having us, Simon.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
It's good to have you both here, and thank you for giving us your time today. I want to start by asking the question, how widespread is the issue of criminality and violence? How many of our students in our schools are impacted, and what kinds of criminality are they most likely to be exposed to?
I think I'll start off here, Simon. I mean, the simple answer is too high. National data suggests that this issue is a significant challenge for many of our young people. Just briefly, just to sort of frame it within the national context, if we look at the Youth Endowment Fund Beyond the Headlines report, that came out in July this year and looks at the trends in violence affecting children. What we saw over the sort of 2010s was serious violent cases increased, spiking in sort of 2017, 2018. Recent years, they have declined slightly. But we need to be really clear. Last year, 99 young lives were lost due to violence. There were 467 cases of children admitted to hospital with injuries caused by a knife. Within these sort of headlines, yes, there are trends. We see that black children are overrepresented both as victims and perpetrators, 6 times more likely to be a victim of a homicide and twice as more likely to be arrested. Boys, we know, far more likely to be involved. I think 22, 23, about 87% of victims were boys. We also need to look at the sort of violence against women and girls. That's becoming an increasing issue, toxic masculinity, Andrew Tate, etc., etc. 3 out of 4 hospital admissions last year were for sexual assault of female. Then there's sort of geographical concentrations. Statistically, those living in the poorest 10 areas, 2.5 more times likely to experience violence. So yes, the trends are alarming. But I think, and where we position ourselves, we actually consider all young people to be at risk. even sitting outside of those trends. And in our work, for example, we've worked with white middle class children, um, wealthy parents, perhaps degree of absenteeism from the parents, sometimes referred to this as teenage affluenza. And what we've seen is even those children who perhaps sit outside perhaps some of those that sort of profiling, if you like, in terms of those most vulnerable. But we see these young people getting involved in gang involvement, drug dealing, county lines, um, female violence, girls in toxic relationships. Um, so actually, this is where we come from. When we actually frame it, we consider all young people to be at risk. But I think it's also worthwhile when we actually look behind the data. The extent of that impact is really hard to measure as well, because what these figures don't include is, they might highlight the physical harm, but they don't tell about the mental scars of loss, the witnessing violence, the coercion, intimidation. Um, all of this is pushed against that backstop of mainstream media, and that narrative where we become sort of socially desensitized. Violence, county lines. Young people are very much more their exposure to these is very much normalized now for simply too many young people within our society.
I think you made an important point that I'd like to unpack a little bit, if I might. There might be a lot of people listening to this thinking, this doesn't affect my school. I'm in a very middle class area. Our parents are doctors and teachers even. But often those people are very, very busy. And you talked about affluenza, and often there's an issue around absent parenting because in the professional classes, because those professionals are so busy, and that leaves children open to influence from gangs and criminality. I wonder if you could just talk more about that, because this isn't just about inner city areas. This is a widespread problem. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think it's absolutely key for those of us within education to move beyond the stereotypical victim perpetrator. Perhaps I alluded to that the data suggests, and I think we need to bear in mind we talk about this idea of affluenza in these young people with money to burn. Again, young people we know like to experiment. We know the lure of drugs. We know experiencing with gateway drugs, vapes, etc. And it's important to highlight that those young people are absolutely vulnerable, or as vulnerable to anybody else, that particular profile of young person. I allude to the fact that, I say this several times, I used to work with a number of head teachers within one of the home counties and used to talk about this. And more often than not, some of those head teachers, when I would start to introduce this topic, you'd see heads go down, phones come out, iPads go out, almost a case of head in the sand. Spoke to one of those head teachers following a recent session, and he basically said, great session, Steve, really informative, but actually this isn't an issue for me. My sole concern is getting my boys in my school into the sixth form college. 6 months later, there was a fatal stabbing outside that school. That head teacher came back and said, okay, I get it now. I was right.
It sounds like it's kind of like one of those things that you don't realize it's a problem until it's escalated to a point where you can see it. It's like something that maybe goes on in the back, but it's kind of hidden away. And if we're not looking and seeing what's happened and being active about supporting our kids, then those problems can brew away. I'm just curious, is there anything about traits individual pupils or students might have that means they're more likely to be affected or sort of inducted by gangs or criminals that might make them attractive to gangs?
Absolutely. Actually, probably. I mean, Des, who's obviously got that experience on the ground, might be a good opportunity, Des, for you just to talk a little bit about to come in a little bit here.
Oh yeah, I just go back to what you said earlier about it doesn't matter what community you come from, the risk is the same. The glamorized nature of the gang culture, youth violence, and knife crime, all our children are exposed to it. And it goes from just attraction all the way down to accepting the gang culture. So one of the things that we see, and it's clear to us, is young people that come from communities that are underserved. They are targets because for the mere fact that the person who is doing the grooming, that person have similar experience, and they are more able to interact with that young person because they can relate to that young person need of belonging, of lack of resources, and so in essence what we are looking at children that want to feel belong. They want to feel a part of something. They want to feel like they have the resources because if you notice, and I know Steve can relate to this as well, you will see a young person come into school and they will have this fake pocketbook. It's not a real Gucci book, pocketbook. The handbag that they wear across their chest, but it would be the fake one. But they would hold it so like almost like a treasure to them. And the young person now that is able to afford the real one, that young person is almost like a celebrity. So just to go back to your question, is it's about you know want to feel like they belong to something, want to feel like they can afford something, want to look like they have status and wealth, and just that type of thing is the thing that kind of put a lot of our young people at risk.
You used an interesting word earlier. You used the word grooming. And a lot of people, when they hear that word, will think more around kind of sexual predators. But this is another form of grooming, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's providing incentive for young people to support criminal activity. Basically, that's what it is. Because what you find is that an older gang member spread the myth that if this young person get caught doing something, the system is not going to do nothing about it. But if I get caught, something is going to happen to me. I might go to prison for 50 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever that looks like. But so the young person is incentivized. First, what they do, they target that young person without the young person knowing. And then they befriend the young person. And then they begin to provide gifts and, incentivize, change in friendship group, change in attitude. And these young people, what you find happen, eventually they begin to disengage. And that just make them more vulnerable.
It actually sounds like a very cynical process. You know, I just wonder if you knew whether there was any evidence around whether kids with specific needs, I'm thinking like ADHD, autism, those kind of conditions, whether we know anything about whether they're more likely to be targeted. I can imagine if you have something like a condition like ADHD, where you might be more impulsive, not thinking about tomorrow, more living in the now, whether that might make you more susceptible.
Yes, it is. When we look at social understanding, the desire for acceptance, kids that have special need are more inclined to move towards where they think they're getting that understanding from, or the understanding that they're getting, they are more relatable to that understanding. We work with kids across the spectrum, and we find that kids that have special need, they are definitely at a high risk just for the mere fact that sometimes they are isolated, they feel alone, they feel they don't have friends, and so on and so forth. So yes, definitely, kids that have special need are most vulnerable.
Just to pick up a little bit on what, sorry, Simon, just to pick up a little bit on what Des said there. Des talks about that vulnerability, and more often than not, we're looking at those factors that marginalise young people. And we know that unfortunately, many of young people with SEND do find themselves on the periphery, both of society and also within education sometimes, because let's face it, many of them do struggle to access the curriculum, and for some it's a challenge of engaging within school. We also look at personal identity around young people, and some of those young people that are struggling with perhaps their personal identity. There's those young people that perhaps may struggle to engage positively within the community as well. and that increases that sense of marginalisation, which of course then comes into education, into schools as well. So what we find in terms of those traits, it's many of those risk factors, if you like, that marginalise young people. And once a young person is marginalised, they look for that sense of belonging, and that's very much the beginning of the grooming process. And that road, our work is very much to stop that door opening.
And for people listening who also might be thinking that this is a secondary problem, predominantly teenagers, this is dribbling now down, and it has been for years actually, down into the top end of primary. And I know from my own personal experience how damaging that can be. I want to think about the impact of criminality in schools now, on the pupils, on their peers, on the schools itself. Steve, you've alluded to the very tragic end of someone dying or going to prison, but the impact is much wider than that, isn't it? Can you talk to that a little bit, please?
Absolutely. I mean, actually Desmond articulates this really well. Desmond's always uses the analogy of a ripple effect, and looking at how that stems initially, obviously, can materialise within an education setting, and also how that sort of extends out to beyond the community. What we start to see within an education setting is that early disengagement, typically negative behaviours. We start to see sort of changing in friendship groups, lateness. Sometimes attendance might become a little bit of an issue. Bearing in mind as well that a lot of this exploitation actually happens beyond the gate, beyond the school gate. And again, it's that vulnerability for many of these young people is either before school or after school. And for many, actually, school represents sanctuary and that sort of safe space, if you like. So typically a flag would be that lateness. What's happening on the way to school? Did I actually even make it to school? What we then start to see is perhaps entering into perhaps a little bit of recreational drug, talk about gateway drugs, vaping, etc. And young people start to see that need for sort of instant gratification. Typically, it might well become sort of quite secretive as well, and social media use within school. These are all sort of flags that we would encourage those working within an education setting to look for, because actually, whilst I'm not saying that every young person who's late for school is at risk of being groomed, but what we need to start doing is joining the dots. Actually, if you've got a young person who's in year 8 and their friendship groups are starting to change, they become a little bit engaged, their behaviour's deteriorated, they're late for school, spending a lot of time potentially on social media, all of a sudden the Gucci bag appears. Join those dots up, and actually that's where we start to see some of those flags, if you like, and they need to be the flags to inform early intervention within an education setting. What we then start to see is behaviour increasingly manifesting out there in the community as well. I don't know whether there's anything you wanted to add to that, Des.
No. Just to kind of put the ripple effect in structure form. So it's the attraction, the involvement, the participation, the identity, and then the acceptance. And they manifest themselves in the signs and indicators that Steve just talked about. So a young person that is attracted to, I don't know, a certain type of lyrics, language, dress, the type of friendship group, that young person unconsciously can become involved in an activity. Like, for example, someone who is targeting them and they don't know they've been targeted, stop and says, "Oh, why are you walking off? Where you going?" "I'm going home." "I'll get in the car, I'll take you, I'll drop you off." But in that car, they might have a machete in the trunk. The driver might be known by police. A few blocks down the road, the police pull over the car. And here this young person, innocent by all means and conscious of whatever this guy is involved with, now this young person is involved with law enforcement activities. Then you have the ripple effect continue down now, because now the young person go to jail. Another set of young people now look at that young person as certain type of, kind of, make no sense type of respect. So now that young person feel emboldened, and as a result of that, they begin to actually consciously participating in, criminal activity. And I know you probably hear about the term postcode, and that is a form of identity. So they takes on that identity, and once they begin to take on that identity, then the next aspect of it comes into play, which is begin to accept the criminality, gang activity, as a viable mean for respect and status and wealth. And so that's kind of like the trajectory of this ripple effect from the grooming and from gang involvement with these young people.
So what you're describing here is a very gradual process. It's not like someone has an epiphany overnight and decides to become a criminal. They're drawn slowly and gradually into that world. It's almost like put it in psychological terms, there's almost like an incremental commitment. They're moving towards a lifestyle. We've talked a little bit now about the problem and the impact in schools. Now let's talk about what we can do about it. And before we started recording, I was having a quick conversation with Steve and Desmond, and we started to talk about sometimes the best bits of a podcast happen before you start recording. Then we were talking about how the solution is not to parachute in motivational speakers who do a half day. Then you tick this off your list. Brilliant. As senior leaders, we've done our bit to combat criminality. You've got a really interesting approach at SOS Plus. It's got a very specific approach to supporting kids at danger of being involved in criminality or are involved in criminality. Could you talk us through kind of practically how it works so people can get a feel for and understand?
I absolutely. So just to pick up on that earlier conversation, there is no quick fix to this. The sort of the here today, the gone tomorrow, the tick box, thank you very much, doesn't work, and actually can cause more harm than good. And again, evidence suggests that sort of scared stiff approach, come in, talk, scare young people, it doesn't work. Again, draw on the YAF, their youth violence toolkit, research informed, actually says it doesn't work, actually can have a negative impact. So what we do is we work with all education settings, primary, secondary, mainstream, and alternative. And our approach is very much to see education as part of the solution. And actually, if we think about us as within schools, we see our young people 35 plus hours a week. We know our pupils, we know our families, we know our communities that we serve, we know the peers of our young people, and we know what influences them. What other service has that level of access and that level of understanding? This is why we absolutely position ourselves. The work of those working within schools is absolutely key, particularly in that early identification. And this needs to start, as we've alluded to before, way back down in primary, because actually many of the seeds for these behaviours and these patterns of behaviours are sown year 5, year 6, sometimes even as young as year 4. And what we do is we actually utilise an empathetic approach. Many of our team that I'm fortunate enough to work with have that sort of that lived experience or that shared experience that many of these young people face. We're able to facilitate both accurate and relevant information by someone who's actually been there. And many of our team, they've had that experience of adversity. They've lacked that sense of belonging. They've gone looking for that identity, if you like. They've also been involved in criminal activity. Many of our team. But what they set about, it's not about glamorization. It's about that mindset change, raising awareness of violence, vulnerability, exploitation, and essentially working with young people to make informed and safe choices, safe for them, but also safe for those around them as well. And key to our work, yes, it's about information giving. It's not about scaring, it's about giving relevant information. Also, it's about working and building those trusted relationships. And again, use that word empowerment. We all know that if you tell a young person to do X, they're going to do Y. But actually, if you empower them to make a considered choice, actually, do you know what? In a lot of cases, they're going to go down the X route as opposed to the Y. And what we start to do is also look at the broader educational advantages of our work, looking at how the work can impact on pupil attendance, behaviour, giving that sort of sense of belonging and developing sort of pro-society attitudes, as well as assisting with sort of mental health, well-being, and developing that sort of broader safeguarding practice and supporting education settings within that.
I'd be interested in learning. I can imagine some young people being resistant to this. And I'm wondering how you overcome that. If you've got the influence of people who are selling them belonging and a lifestyle that they're getting hooked into, how do we then sort of, I can imagine, how do we overcome that? What's your approach?
I think it comes with that empathy, and that approaching these challenges, if you like, from a different lens. And if I go back to my time in school, I had great relationships with an awful lot of the young people, but I was a white male from a very different background who walked around in a suit, and also was in a position of, let's use the word, authority. And actually, there was that inherent resistance. Yes, we had those really positive relationships, but actually, deep down, did I know their world? Did I understand their challenges? And that is when we go back to sort of 2018, when actually I first started working with Desmond, and actually started working with Desmond in the setting I was in to look at and tackle the problem from this different angle, from that different lens. And what Desmond was able to provide was a very different angle, and he was able to offer that relatability, that empathy, as well as a much more enhanced knowledge and understanding of the issues and challenges that these young people faced. And what we were able to do, and Des did this fantastically well, and this is the foundation for much of our work within St Giles today, was use that relationship to start to break down the barriers. And if we look at a lot of the conversations in schools today, there's a lot of conversation about firm, strict, and what have you. And increasingly, particularly in the new political agenda, questions, is that starting to soften now? Do we actually need to get under not the behaviour that we see, but what actually sits underneath that behaviour? And the only way you're going to get underneath that is starting to engage with and understand these young people more.
Right, right. So again, it's about the relatability, your ability to relate. Coming, and when we talk about cultural competency, what we are actually talking about is understanding where that young person is coming from, understanding your own vulnerability when you were their age, and what drove you, what pushed you, what pulled you into criminal gang exploitation. Now, just to make a point clear, the school, and we have to give school big credit, because I'm a big supporter of education. I believe education is the key, and that's what saved me. That's what turned my life around. So I know that education is the key. The school do provide a lot of support for their students, for their pupils. So the SOS service is an added support that the school, schools who have us in their schools, employ in support of these kids. Now, let me just say something about relatability. Relatability give the young people someone that they can talk to, that they believe understand where they're coming from, someone who have experienced some of the challenges that they are going through, and as a result of that, they feel more comfortable self-reporting. They feel more comfortable talking about the challenges that they have, and they also feel more comfortable taking advice and guidance. And the key advice and guidance that we give them is the importance of positive engagement in especially educational settings, but more broadly with support structures. And starting with that support structure is their parents or carer, teachers, and other community support groups. And these young people, because and it's so, Simon, it's an amazing thing to watch. You could see a young person coming into a session for the first time, meeting me for the first time. And when they come, their hoodies are up. They barely believe that they should be there. They don't even want to be there. And then once the St. Giles Trust SOS Plus staff begin to talk about their own experience, the head start pops up, the hoodie start drop, and they start getting more comfortable. And sooner or later, they begin to conversate with you. And once that begin to happen, they always want to come back and talk to you, and they always want to listen to you. I had one young person, and I know we're going to talk a little bit, but I just want to make this point, it's on my mind. I had one young person who, his challenge was anger. He have issues around anger, and he would he would throw chairs. He would go act really irritated. And so he had came to my program, to the program, and one day he was up there throwing chairs, and the teacher come and get me and said, Desmond, come and see what you could do. So I went up there and I said, come with me, and he followed me back to my office, and I let him sit there for a minute to reflect. We're both reflecting. And then I just asked him one simple question. Why? What happened? And he said, I don't know. He said he don't know. And then my job was to kind of explain to him that his behavior is not only endangering him, but also his other student, the teachers, and everything. At the end of the session, he was so calm, he was so accepting. And then this is the key. What we're going to do about it. What I want you to do, I want you to go back up to your class, and I want you to apologize to your classmate. I want you to apologize to your teacher. He said, but I don't know what to do. I said, don't worry. I'm going to show you how to do it. We both sit there, and this is where the collaborative aspect of the program is important, because we do not impose solution. We collaborate with the mentee in coming up with that unique solution to support that challenge. We both sit there and we formulate a quick little note for him. And I said, this is it. And I take him back up there, and he go. This kid was so brave. It just made me emotional talking about it. He went in front of his class, and he stood up and he read a little paragraph. And you know what happened? The entire class stood up and clapped him. That's probably the first time in his life he has ever been applauded. And he was so happy about it. And that's the type of thing that this relatable relationship, this cultural competency provide, not just for that student, but for the entire school, both for staff and for pupils within the school. And it's an amazing thing.
People listening to this, sometimes, especially people listening to this podcast, right, they really care about the kids in their class, and they want them to do well in terms of their social ability and their emotions and their outcomes, aside from their academic outcomes. But sometimes, as a human being, as an adult, although you may want to connect with everyone in your room and help everybody, you're not necessarily the right person to do that, or the best person, maybe is the word. I think sometimes you have to give ourselves permission to say that that's okay. I might not have the shared lived experience or that, the cultural competence to do the job as well as someone else on staff. And that doesn't mean that you failed as a human being or failed as a teacher or an educator or a learning mentor. It just means that there's someone else in the team that can do the job better, and that's okay. Which can be a hard message to hear sometimes.
Yes, it is. It is. It is.
I think as well, it's about having a culture within a particular setting that allows you to say, do you know what, it's okay, and B, to open their door to allow organisations like us, and there's other people out there that do a cracking job as well, to come in and work with these young people from that different lens. And that's a phrase I use quite a lot. It's a different lens, because having the culture that within the school that's actually brave enough to do that is absolutely key as well, because no school wants to be labelled the school with, quote, the gang problem. And actually you do get, there's always that risk of the keyboard warriors hitting the keyboard. Oh, they've got this and they've got that in, they have the next gang member talking to them. Whoa, there must be a problem within the school. We've got to bear in mind as well, actually, for many of these young people that are entrenched, actually school, they keep their head down. They're not coming in wearing colours, wielding knives, because they don't need the attention of school leaders, anybody else within school. Actually come and keep their head down, go under the radar at school. The problems are very much a community issue. And schools are so well placed to support and tackle that as part of an education response to a community societal challenge. I think that's absolutely key.
And you talk about keyboard warriors there. I mean, the keyboard warriors are after simple solutions, often extreme solutions to complicated problems. And one thing I say is they don't build statues to critics. Can you can you tell us a little bit about what sessions practically would look like in school? If I was to put a camera up in the room where these conversations were happening, what does a session look like so I can imagine it in my head?
I think the starting point is context is key. There's no one size fits all. And we've talked about community and community context and what have you. We've got to remember every school operates within a different context. So an understanding of the issues, the challenges, and the context within that school and those young people are working is absolutely key from a starting point. And what we tend to do is utilize three sort of key approaches. There's that group facilitation, sharing relevant and inaccurate knowledge, either to larger groups of young people and also potentially smaller targeted group work where we can break down and unpack many of those issues. And we're talking, yes, we're talking county lines, knife awareness, grooming, etc. But also as well, it's about extending our scope, some of the other issues and challenges and risks that young people face themselves. We do some work, particularly on sort of female focused work around sort of girls' empowerment, around positive relationships, unpacking perhaps joint enterprise a little bit, and so young people understand that actually they can still be guilty of involvement, even if they weren't the one who necessarily, shall we say, inflicted any sort of injury. So we talk about joint enterprise, talk about conspiracy, social media, understanding gateway drugs. So what we try to do is utilize, if you like, many different angles, and we would work with a setting to look at what are the main challenges within that community and how can we best approach that. So facilitation is one method. Perhaps the most empowering method and approach is our embedded mentoring. And this is about developing that trusted relationship. It's about actually embedding someone within the fabric of the school, working with young people on a one-to-one or small group basis over a prolonged period of time, because we've talked about the impact and we've talked about the ripple effect and we've talked about embedded change takes time. This isn't a tick box exercise. And I think the third aspect of our work, and this is, when we talk about culture, this is absolutely key, is actually professionals training. Tackling that void of understanding that exists within many education professionals. And that's not a criticism there, but let's face it, when we're training to be educators, we're not sit down and talk through risk factors indicators around youth violence. So what actually we've got, and again, we see it day in, day out in our work, is a lack of understanding. And quite often we find that young people are more informed than those adults that are trusted with their safeguarding. So part of our work as well is also about upskilling the knowledge, the understanding, identifying risk factors and indicators of many young people with education professionals. We're not saying we have all the solutions, because we don't. What we can do is work with professionals to identify those most at risk. And again, early identification is absolutely key. You've got to know what you're looking for. We've got to be able to join the dots, look at those subtleties, and start to think, actually, young person goes missing, has got an absent parent, all of a sudden it's got the Gucci bag, friendship groups have changed, tick, 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 tick. All of these start to point towards us. But what we're actually talking about is a mapping, in supporting professionals in mapping and in making that informed sort of benchmarking, if you like, of who is actually at risk.
Mm-hmm. And just to, if you don't mind me, add a point here to here, as what the session looks like. So if you peep in through the window and you want to see what's going on in the room, what you'd see a fully engaged discussion with a young person. Begin with making sure the young person understand that safeguarding is the number one priority here. So if you tell me something that I deem to be a risk for you and other student staff at the school, we are going to report that. So starting the session is confidentiality, safeguarding, review of the session before. Then we go into this conversation, whatever the issue is for that day for that particular young person. And so the session is conversational and it is activity based. So, like Steve talked about, for example, joint enterprise. If we are using a presentation to demonstrate the consequences around and the knowledge around joint enterprise, we would not just show the presentation and talk through the presentation. We would demonstrate. So we like to use what we call a tool which says the tell, explain, describe, the TED. So we tell, we explain, and we describe. And then the young person express his understanding by telling, explaining, and describing. And at some point, there is a clear understanding that we are both shared understanding on this. So it's conversational, it's highly interactive, it is fully engaging, and it is activity based. So I just want to say, if you're peeping through the window, what you would see, and then you'd see the mentee with worksheets in front of him or her, and you would have a pen. You'd see the mentor with a marker, a whiteboard. You'd see a monitor screen to show the presentation, and then you'd also see, just to make sure that safeguarding is at the key. You'd see a office phone or a walkie-talkie, because the key is that we are dealing with young people that at some point we are involved in a trusted relationship. So they trust you and you trust them. So that's kind of what you would see peeping through that window, Simon.
Ultimately, we're trying to encourage young people to develop their critical thinking skills, and it's about making those positive choices. I think as well, but there's talked about the structure of the sessions, and I think that's absolutely key, because what these aren't do is come and sit down for an hour a week and just offload. But we also recognise the fact that sometimes there is a need for that safe space, and there is the need for young people actually to have that conversation about what's happened at the weekend, about maybe brothers just being imprisoned, or what have you, or something they've seen, heard, experienced. So there is that we call it that safe space as well, and that's absolutely key, because all our work is needs led. The young people set the agenda, and we come back to context is key. There's no one size fits all. It's about taking the young person, and it's about supporting them in the direction of travel that they're going down, and actually redirecting as is needed.
That makes perfect sense, and that's so often true with many of areas of SEMH and supporting kids with behaviour. That connection is so important. What's unique about the lived experience of your SOS Plus mentors and facilitators that enables them to develop these connections and have that sort of cultural understanding and really be able to connect with these students in ways that other adults have not been able to in the past?
If you don't mind me take this one, Steve. So the lived experience have to be a genuine transformation. So you can't say you're providing support to young people using your lived experience with one foot in criminality and one foot in the professional space. It has to be a genuine transformation from past negative and criminal behavior. It has to be clear. The lived experience have to be accountable and responsible. And the support have to be consistent. So with those three, it's more probable, likely, that you become relatable, because you're sincere. It's not fake. It's not a performance. It's a connected delivery. So that's what the lived experience is about. It's about authentic transformation, accountability and responsibility, consistency, and most importantly, relatability. So that's what makes it so unique.
I guess kids can smell fake a mile away. So when you're talking about authenticity and reality, yeah. Where are you going to take the program next? What's the future for the SOS Plus program?
Future's looking good. Um, we're currently involved with an evaluatory study with YF as part of their trusted adult round, and what that will do is give us those sort of validated outcomes of our work, which will be absolutely fantastic because obviously demonstrating the impact. There's so many different facets coming into this. Having those validated outcomes will be like gold dust for us. Also, very mindful of wider education agendas now, and yeah, attendance, well-being, behaviour, inclusion, safeguarding, all very much on that agenda. And what we're starting to see is, as we sort of wake up from the impacts of COVID, again, there's a lot of conversation. We see it now, the impact, exclusions, attendance. And I suppose a real key of our work is a real focus on understanding the underlying issues post COVID, rather than just sort of focusing just on how the behaviour sort of manifests itself. And obviously, our sort of trust out, the mentoring is absolutely key, as well as working with education settings to develop that understanding and that early identification. I suppose bigger picture, political landscape, etc. Three easy wins. Am I like a broken record in saying this? Number one, make it mandatory as part of teacher training. Put a unit in, whether it be within your safeguarding or whatever. So actually what we start to do is, as we get those people come up, future teachers of tomorrow, they've got that understanding of risk factors, indicators, etc., etc. Everything we've talked about, mandatory. Boom. Number two, crank it up with the safeguarding. Your annual safeguarding reviews. Let's have more on this. One slide with a passing reference. Come on, we can do a bit more than that. And number three, potentially slightly unpopular. A lot of talk about Ofsted at the minute, etc., etc. Crank it up within the inspection guidance. We saw how, for example, British values a few years back was really projected onto as part of that inspection framework. And actually schools all of a sudden sat up and took that issue a whole lot more seriously. Let's put something on the inspection guidance around this as well, so it doesn't become that tick box exercise. It becomes much more deep rooted, if you like, in terms of entrenched within the work of the school.
Yeah, sustained piece of work over time. So let's imagine then that you're a teacher or a school leader listening to this right now or watching this right now, and you don't have access to the kind of support that your organization provides, and you suspect that one of the students you work with is getting involved in criminality. Maybe they're showing some of the symptoms that you spoke about earlier, poor attendance and changing and shifting peer groups. Maybe they've turned up with a Gucci bag. What's the first step you can take to support them with that risk of exploitation?
Okay, so as Steve talked about earlier, we provide professional training. So we're not just in this space just to support that one young person, but we are in this space to support the school in general. So professional training around what is it that we are trying to support the young person with, and how it would impact the staff. Because to be honest, some of our teachers, they're not, quote unquote, from the ends, if you know what I mean. They're not from around the way. So there is challenge that is a built-in challenge. So what we do, we try to upskill professionals in this space in understanding that dynamic. One of the things that the professionals in this space can do is to, concerns and issue properly identified, take action towards them. Don't sit on something that might seem minute. If there is a concern, do something about it. St. Giles Trust is a charity that supports at-risk and vulnerable children and young people and vulnerable adults. So St. Giles Trust is the prime organization that they should contact. And St. Giles Trust, like Steve says, is not the only organization that do these things. But I think take out the fear factor, the reputational damage fear factor. Put that outside the window and focus on the need that you're identifying within your school, your student body. And then I think we would be kind of making the right step in the right direction, if I'm making sense.
I think it's also important that schools look at a whole school approach where they suspect that there might be young people at risk. And what we're talking here is actually a cultural shift. There's that phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And in schools, we can have the best laid plans and intentions because we have an action plan with education, but we haven't got that culture, particularly around this issue. Then those plans are never going to materialise. Get to a point within a school setting where, do you know what, it's okay to talk about lives. It's okay to talk about violence. It's okay to challenge that mainstream narrative. Look at how we can utilise curriculum to start developing those challenges and build that culture. Yes, education and staff training is absolutely key as well. Tackling that void of understanding, but also making sure that you've got a school where it's that cultural shift, where it's okay. Bearing in mind as well, engage your pupils. Talk to them about the national picture. What are their views? What are their opinions? There is no one size fits all in terms of tackling this issue. I can't use that phrase. Context is key. But we would absolutely, from personal experience, be open to that cultural shift. Remember, it's okay. Let's get our heads out of the sand and let's start working with young people.
And for listeners and viewers that want to find out more about your resources and your website, how can they get in touch with you? How can they find out more about you?
I think obviously we're always open to direct contact. Education at St Giles Trust, all one word, .org.uk. Or equally email me directly, steve.warner at stgilestrust.org.uk. Also got our website address. Des, you got that the website address for us?
Okay, so it's ST Cent and then Giles GILES and Trust TRUST.
And we should say here that St Giles here is being spelled STGILES. It's not saint as in the word, it's saint as in the abbreviation. And I will put direct links and copies of those email addresses in the comments and the show notes if you're listening on the podcast to the audio podcast. So all you got to do is click right through to get the information you need. Desmond and Steve, it's been a pleasure to have you both on the show. I've learned a lot this morning, and I'm sure everyone listening and watching has learned a lot that they can practically take away with them to support the kids that they care for and they teach in school. So thank you for sharing your experience with us on the show today.
Thank you for having us.
No. So for me, I just want to say a very special thanks for the opportunity to just say a few words about the work that we are doing, and we just want to give due credit and respect to our young people who, brave enough, courageous enough to, to walk in our spaces and to, to accept some of our guidance. This is a very amazing thing.
And that was Desmond Skies and Steve Warner from the SOS Plus program and St Giles. I'm sure you'll agree there was lots of food for thought there about how we support our students in school with criminality and how these are complex problems that require something more than a tick box exercise to tackle in our school. If you found that useful, please remember to like and share. Share this information with your colleagues. And as promised, I'll make sure that the URLs and emails that Steve and Desmond discussed are in the comments if you're watching this on video, or they're in the episode description if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast. That's all I've got for you today. I hope you have a brilliant week, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of School Behaviour Secrets.